From beautiful downtown Prestonsburg, Kentucky, it's the MWO podcast on Patreon. Hosted by one half of the ballers and shot callers of horror talk radio, a man who's been creepy as fuck since 1980, it's the Creepy Kentuckian. Take it away, Bulls.
Howdy, folks. It's the Creepy Kentuckian here for the September 1st edition of the MWO podcast on Patreon. Co-host this week. You've actually been on the MWO before. What was it about? It was one of the early ones on Patreon.
Really early.
Yeah, really early. But we're getting you back on because we got, some new technology with the StreamYard stuff. And you're kind of an expert on what we're talking about today. So Robert Scott, a lot of folks will remember you from back in the day, 2009, 2010.
It was a long time ago.
Doesn't seem like it's like 11, 12 years ago, but it is.
I know, it blows my mind. Every once in a while on Facebook, pictures of those times will come up, and I'm like, that was 11 years ago? Like, what the hell, man?
Yeah. I don't know if my liver could do what it did back then. I'm pretty sure. What we're wanting to do on this show, and hopefully we'll do at least one more, maybe two more before Halloween, is take a look at some of the Universal monster movies. Now, these are films that, and I look back in the archive, and you're not going to believe this, of all the fucking shows that we've done, there is only one review me and Uncle Bill did of a Universal monster movie in that entire run of shows.
Which one?
Oddly enough, it was The Mummy. So I searched on Patreon for that. I was like, I wonder if I didn't even remember reviewing that one, to be honest with you. We're going to do kind of the deep dive, if you will, and talk about the original Universal monster movie from 1931. Todd Browning, a fellow Kentuckian. Can you believe that?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Dracula. So, yeah, this is one that, as far as other than that Universal show, we've never really talked about it. It's the first time that I'd seen it in quite a few years. First off, now I didn't grow up with this movie. I was probably 20, in my early 20s, before I even seen this movie for the first time.
Really?
As odd as that is, yeah.
I saw it when I was a kid. There's a horror host here in Michigan, Sir Graves Ghastly, who I grew up on. And it was part of the Universal Shock Theater package, so they would play this. And I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching it. Like, my earliest impressions, I was super young, too young to really realize what was going on, but I thought he was a scary butler because he keeps waiting on Renfield. He's like, here's your drink, here's your water. I'm like, this guy's a butler and a vampire. And I didn't know what a count was, but yeah, to me, he was the scary butler.
So what was your introduction, though? Do you remember when you first saw the movie? What circumstances?
I don't. My sister and I, we used to go in the basement, and we had this big TV, and Sir Graves would always say, draw the shade, shut off the lights, and we would follow those directions to a T, and we'd get a completely dark room and then watch these horror movies. I remember, Frankenstein, and every once in a while he would play Godzilla, but mostly like it was a Universal, like Shock Theater was a Universal package. So I saw so many of those things. You'd see him so much that you'd get them confused because, Lugosi would play like Dracula-like vampire in other movies.
Right.
And so I remember when I was an adult sitting down and watching it, and I'm like, key scenes that I thought were in this, or it happened to be like, Mark of the Vampire or something else. And
oddly enough, like I didn't really, I've been looking into this sort of thing. He did other vampire movies, like you said, but this was the only Universal monster movie that, he was actually Dracula, right?
He did play Dracula one other time, and that was when in Abbott and Costello Meet Dracula. But other than that, all the rest of the vampires are like derivative of Dracula, but they're not Dracula at all. See Bela Lugosi in a cape, and it's not Dracula or Abbott and Costello. It's just another vampire.
But this one, vampires up to this point, it was the primarily what Nosferatu, I guess.
Yep.
Was
Nosferatu was actually based on Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. They went and did it. They didn't buy the rights to it or anything. And Stoker's, I think it was his daughter, tried to have that movie. She took him to court, tried to get the movie destroyed, and yeah, luckily she didn't, because it is like a classic. But this definitely, that was the first, and this was actually the first like Dracula.
The plot of the movie, I mean, it's loosely, would you say loosely based on the book? I mean, it changes quite a few, the look of Dracula.
They were going to adapt Bram Stoker's novel, and it was going to be like an epic, but then the Great Depression hit, and so they opted to do the play, because there was a play adaptation before the movie, obviously, which actually is interesting. Like Lugosi played Dracula on the Broadway, and Edward Van Sloan, who plays Van Helsing, was also opposite him in the play.
With the play, I know that Bela Lugosi, he really, really wanted to do the movie, so much so that he took it was like an insanely low amount.
Insanely low. He took like $500 a week, which is a quarter of what the guy that plays John Harker paid in Dracula.
Yeah.
It's almost like because when they first started doing it, they wanted anybody but Lugosi. There's actually a famous telegram that Carl Laemmle, the head of Universal, said not interested in Bela Lugosi at this time. When they first hired Todd Browning, he was going to work with Lon Chaney Sr., who they had a history together, like Phantom of the Opera, like Hunchback of Notre Dame. But unfortunately, Lon Chaney died the year before production started, so they had to find another guy, and they were going to. The studio wanted Conrad Veidt, but they eventually, Lugosi just campaigned. It's like he almost campaigned himself into no paycheck. They were like, okay, well, you want it so bad, here's a penny.
Yeah, that's crazy too, because so much of what makes the classic Dracula that everyone knows is just Bela Lugosi. It's his accent, his mannerisms. It could have easily just been someone else, and who knows how that would have turned out.
It is interesting to wonder, what would it have looked like with Lon Chaney Sr. because of his elaborate makeups and stuff? What would he have done? What would it have looked like? I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
But sadly, I don't even think that there are concept art or anything. I haven't seen it ever.
Marketed as a romance movie.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that until you.
And yeah, I was watching one of the documentaries on it because it came out on Valentine's Day, 1931. That was the release date on it. Oh. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, we'll talk about the movie itself a little bit.
One thing I did want to say, you mentioned Lugosi's performance, and here we are, exactly 90 years later, and that is your idea of Dracula. Every little kid's Dracula. It's it's Lugosi. It's not, anything but Lugosi. He himself became this iconic, as famous as Mickey Mouse or anything, and it's all him. It's really cool.
But I guess the story, starting off, we'll briefly review it. I'm sure most of you people have seen this movie by now. But for the sake of the review, it starts out, it's set in Transylvania. Renfield's a real estate agent who is looking for Count Dracula, and all the locals are like, no, you don't want to, don't visit Count Dracula. He's got some sort of business deal about a new property in London, and he meets up with Dracula, and eventually he pretty much is, under his mind control with Renfield, and they go to London. All this happens pretty quickly. This is a 71-minute movie?
I think so, yeah.
And look for victims throughout the English countryside. there. And Dracula himself has a fascination with the Mina character. So I guess that's where the romance comes to play. I think everybody wants to, take Mina's hand, baby, if you will. And also you're introduced to a few other characters, including Van Helsing, who is the first one to notice that Dracula does not have a reflection in the mirror. He's taken woman after woman over the course of the 7.
Lots of guys on the ship too. I mean, it definitely in the book is it's kind of implied in the movie, but yeah, that's what part of the thing. Like with Renfield in the castle, the studio had some problems with that because they thought it was like had some homosexual overtones, but Dracula fed on Renfield. While in the book it was Jonathan Harker's there, but in the movie, in both versions, he was actually going to like feed off of him, but the studios were like, "Oh no,
right.
We're not going to do that."
Yeah, for 1931, that's pretty risque to say the least. Some of the effects are very dated for today, but it's got a certain charm to it as well. I guess the transformation scenes from the rubber flapping bat into Dracula, and then this is a technique that was used for many years in all kinds of old black and white movies, where his eyes are supposedly glowing, but it's just like a couple of flashlights or whatever that's up there. But those are
that with Freddy Krueger too. I mean, that's like a technique that is lost.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just iconic scenes at the same time, though. Oddly enough, so and I did not grow up with this movie, but I do find myself every once in a while wanting to go back and revisit it. Because it is such an iconic. I mean, I don't know of any one particular movie that just created so much. I mean, think about. I know the character of Dracula was around, but the modern day Dracula, even still, like you said, 90 years later, comes from this movie.
Yep. I would argue that Frankenstein definitely the same, and actually the same year, 1931.
Right. They were working on this one, I think, or that one when this one was out.
It's amazing. Like both of those images are so iconic, and it's 90 years ago.
And it seems like they took movies a lot more because it was so early on, I guess, in filmmaking, where they were just, every one of them was a big deal. I mean, it was a huge production. This is so early on. There is only like a couple, like the opening has some music in it.
Yeah,
right?
That's one thing I was going to mention too, is it can be kind of a dry watch for modern audiences, because this is early into the talkies, and they didn't really do scores, so they would use some incidental music, like they use Swan Lake famous, like at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And actually use that same music for the Mummy, the theme to the Mummy too. It's interesting how it can feel so slow because you don't have that music driving it. And I think in 1999, I think they hired Philip Glass, this composer, to make a score to it, which I haven't actually sat through the whole thing. It never works for me. It just doesn't. I don't know. There's something about the silent, no music. It's, even though it's slow, it's creepier.
I'm definitely with you on that. I mean, I've noticed it with this movie and Frankenstein, and it's like that silence, but at the same time, you can kind of hear the background, and it kind of gives it a weird atmosphere.
Essentially, like you mentioned Frankenstein, that the reveal of the makeup where it's so silent, and you just hear like the background, the ambient noise, and it's just so weird and creepy that way.
That one in particular, it has such a dark vibe to it too. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you could add music to that movie and make it anything but worse. Probably. Give us a thumbs up.
Up your butt.
Like, subscribe, and if you subscribe, here's something else you can do. Once you subscribe, you can click the bell notification, right? and it'll notify you anytime that Dead Pit puts up new shit.
Or don't. I really don't give a if you do or
I
not.
want you to. I want you to.
I don't care.
Let's keep our community growing here on
No,
YouTube.
I don't like it. I don't want you to touch nothing.
Listen, they need to do that, pal.
No, don't you dare touch it.
Thumbs up, subscribe, and click that bell. Thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. DeadPitOnPatreon.com is the only place to check out a complete archive of the old Dead Pit radio shows all the way back from 2005 on, in addition to the midweek shows and fan commentaries, exclusive podcasts, and much more. Dead Pit on Patreon.com if you're interested. Tiers start at only $1.